new anthology, Colorism, Essays, and Poems. And we are joined by several of the writers that are featured in that book. And they're going to speak to you about who they are, why they write, and they're going to read a little bit from their work. But before we get into that, I want to give you a little bit of an intro. So some of you are very familiar with who I am and the work that I do, and some of you may just be hearing about this for the first time. And again, if you're joining us, make sure you let us know where you're from. But I'm Sarah Webb. I am the creator of Colorism Healing. I started the website back in 2013, and I quickly realized that people were in search of creative writing pieces that dealt with colorism. And in my own search, I found that there weren't a lot of things available. So I said, well, let's host a contest, and that way people can write and submit things. And so from those contests, which started in 2014, and there have been 3 since, I have published a few books. The first one came out in January, Colorism Poems, with featured writing from the 2014 to 2016 contest, and then the most recent one in 2017. And so that's where all this stems from. What is colorism? So some people might not have ever heard of it, might not be very familiar with it. So there's an ism at the end, right? So we know that it might have something to do with maybe a prejudice or discrimination or a bias, and you would be right to assume that. So colorism is discrimination or bias based on color. Now, a lot of times we associate that with racism, but the difference between colorism and racism would be that a person can be the same race as someone else and have a very different skin tone than that person, or a very different hair texture than that person, even though they're the same race. And so colorism would result in treating that person differently, even if they're the same race, simply because they look different, either because their skin is lighter or darker, or because their hair texture might be different. So that's the difference between colorism and racism. And all of the works featured in the new piece talk about personal experiences with colorism, but they also take a historical perspective on colorism. They look at colorism globally around the world and across different cultures. And also remember that you can type in questions as we go, and we're gonna have a Q&A session, a discussion session after the featured writers get to present and share some of their work with you all. So if you have any questions about colorism, if you're not quite sure what that is, you can post questions about that as well as posting questions about, to the actual writers as they're presenting. And we're gonna present them in the order that they appear in the book. Again, so we have Ebony Adams, we have Kritika, and we have Elizabeth. So we might have a couple of more writers that join us later in the live stream, but for now we have these 3 lovely ladies. And without further ado, I'm gonna let them speak to you. They're gonna tell you a little bit about themselves, and they're gonna be reading from the piece that they have in the book. So Ebony, are you ready?
No.
Yeah, okay, so you can take it away.
So my name is Ebony from Stanford on the East Coast. 31 or your come from school. I was different. All the black girl with the white voice. I never knew or why my skin made so cute. And side, that skinned. I just snapped the old daddy side. It didn't bother me because I didn't understand the. I remember going, but something stopped me. I was staring at her face, disgusted. Beautiful was he. At that moment, were my lips, my eyes, and I hated them. Me her face, me his skin. For a year, my blackness and my overall identity. The funny thing is, you would think as an adult, the ridicule, the comparisons, the black shaming would stop. For me, it didn't stop with the dark skin. Now I have people laughing at my nappy, unprofessional hair, or wondering why I changed my voice over the phone to sound white. No matter how hard I fight, the thick defeat me. Physically, she's more appealing than the cute for a brown-skinned girl with a white voice. I have to be okay with that. Okay with that because I have a daughter who will also be that cute for a little brown-skinned girl sitting in the corner waiting for life to happen, all because she took after her mama's side. So that was my piece. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It took a lot to write. It took a lot in me to actually dig that emotion up because it's not something that I always knew. Colorism is a term that I just found out about this year, actually, watching a YouTube video and listening to other people struggle made me learn and actually notice that I went through the same thing as well. All through middle school, through high school, I was bothered by my skin tone, and it didn't help that I live in Connecticut in a area that's predominantly white or with kids who have white parents who were mixed and had lighter skin than I did. So it was very hard to do and hard to grow up with. So essay is really close to me. So I hope you guys really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you, Ebony. Yay, we got some applause in the live YouTube chat. So there was some trouble hearing you at the very beginning, but I think about halfway through, you were able to start picking up on that. So in the Q&A, if people want to ask more questions, maybe, or even if you want to repeat some of the parts that people might have missed when we get to the Q&A. But thank you for your wonderful words, and we'll be hearing from you again. Up next, we're going to have, I believe it's Kritika next, right? And she is the author of I Am More. So let me pull up Miss Kritika. Hi, Kritika.
Hi. Okay, so my name's Kritika. I'm 16 years old and I'm a junior in high school from New Jersey. So I really started liking writing, especially when I was in middle school, and I had a difficult transition from elementary school to middle school, and writing really helped me through that time. So I especially enjoyed poetry, and I started writing a lot about my emotions and how I felt. And I later started to join literary magazines in my school, got my work published internationally and nationally, and yeah, that really became my thing. And other than that, I also like music a lot, and I'm in my school's choir, and yeah. But as for this competition, growing up, culturally, my family is Indian, so they used to talk a lot about skin color and how girls with lighter skin were better than girls with darker skin. And they used to say that if you didn't have skin light enough, no boy would marry you. So these were all ideas in my head, but I didn't necessarily know that they had the term colorism until I actually read about it in the Colorism Healing website. And it made me think about my own childhood experiences and experiences that I had in school, where girls would tell me that I wasn't light enough and I wasn't pretty enough. So that really inspired me to take a stand and share my poem, because I wanted people to understand that this wasn't right and that they didn't have to feel the same way that I did. So I will share a quote from my poem, which I really believe will touch others too. And that is, I am brown, but cut through my skin and I'll burst of stars and hope. My heart holds wisps of dreams that you can lace through your hands, and my veins will bleed of crimson love. And I think that really goes to show that you're not just your skin tone, you're so much more than that. There's a lot more to you as a person than how you look and how people perceive you. So yes, I hope you enjoyed that.
All right, Kritika, thank you for sharing your story. I think that was really inspiring, and I love the fact that you're still a teenager. A lot of the people who submit to the contest happen to be teenagers, and I think that age range is very important and very pivotal in terms of thinking about like identity and culture and like just developing your sense of who you are. So thank you for your courage and sharing part of that story. And I see some people leaving comments about how they've had similar experiences, even though they might come from a different culture. Thinking about how, oh, you're pretty for a dark girl is a statement that people hear, and it's an experience that way too many people have, and that a lot of people can relate to. So I really appreciate your thoughts and your words on that. All right, so we're gonna go to our third featured writer, and that is Elizabeth. And Elizabeth is the author of A Legacy of Colorism. So Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi. So I started writing this specific poem, I think 2 years ago. And when I started writing it, it just became like this huge 3-page poem, and it wasn't ready to submit. So I had to take some time and like take some space away from it and then come back to it and edit it a little bit. For me, this poem is like both very personal, but at the same time, I try to address sort of like the historical aspect of colorism, because at the time I was in a world literature class, and we were talking about like how colonization has influenced colorism in like different minority communities. So that was really on my mind at the time when I was writing this poem. So I'm going to read a little section of it for you guys. Cut to now, cut to blue vein. Black girls wash out their color with bleach, like blood of Jehovah, water skin with cocoa butter and jojoba. No one fucks with dark girls, so lighten up, let the white girls tan. Growing up in the suburban South, my sisters and I, we whispered, worried, about my father who had blue eyes but our kinky hair. My sisters asked, Mom, is Dad black? My older sister, Kyra, held up her arm for evidence. She said, he was a lot lighter, a lot paler than some white people. He's black and light, Mom sighed, diced onions for chili. She never said how Black people got so light.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. I like the cliffhanger that you gave us. So I know what the audience might not know is I know that there's another half of that piece. It's really good. And she never explained how Black people got so light. Dun, 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 right? So there's a lot of rich history that, as you said, connects to your personal experiences as well. And so I love that about the piece. So we have someone else who's joined us, Janelle.
Hi.
Right? Hi, how
Hello.
are you?
I'm good.
So you're right on time, actually.
Okay, perfect. I was just scrambling around trying to figure out how to like fix my computer.
Okay, cool. So we've had Ebony, Kritika, and Elizabeth. They've all shared a little bit about themselves, and then they've read from their piece. So if you're ready, you can give an intro of yourself and then read a little bit from your piece. So like Ebony, Janelle is one of the essay writers, and her piece is titled Hues of Hatred and Healing.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Janelle. I'm currently an undergrad at Hofstra University studying cultural anthropology with a minor in Asian studies and psychology. 18. Okay, let's see where I'll read from. Okay. There are words, though, that hurt more than anything other, particularly ones that aim to target something that cannot be changed, like skin color. In today's society, these words fly around like magpies, darting in and out of the air, attacking with random or unseen hatred. They peck and punch and scar over, resulting in traumatic memories. The worst part is, it doesn't stop. As long as there is ignorance and hatred and misinformation spread everywhere, wounds like those don't fade after 4 or 5 years. They remain in the heart, where every word finds its way in. They define you in the moment, and you think, what am I worth? Is this all I am? Such things can circle and spread like wildfire. There is colorism in everyday life, a byproduct or a child, if you will, of racism. It is target-to-target oppression. It is the discrimination of others, made by those who rule and perpetuate by those who themselves feel oppressed. They call it the Russian doll of discrimination. The hues of skin, the feel of hair, the color of eyes aren't things that should define anyone, much less confine anyone. Features that cannot be changed like birthmarks are what make us into who we are. To attack those things is to attack someone as a person. Those that bully, the ones who place hatred upon minorities, speak clearly through their actions. If I am being made fun of, if I am not good enough, then neither are you. If I cannot leave peacefully, no one shall. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. Pull my video back up. Okay, so we have one more writer who is trying to join. We all know how technology can be. So I'm going to see if I can get her on. And for those of you who might have joined a little late, I want to remind you about the giveaways. We're going to give away one after all the writers have presented, and then also one at the end. But in order to qualify for the free giveaway, you have to post in the chat at least once. So that post can be a comment, it could be a question, it could be a series of emojis, that sort of thing. So let's see if we can get Arego to join. Ah, there she is.
Hi guys, I'm so sorry. I was having issues.
That's okay. So the Google Hangout links don't always last forever. So there's probably like some mix up with that. But we are more than happy that you are here now. And actually you are right on time as well.
Okay, perfect.
So far we've had Ebony, Kritika, Janelle, and Elizabeth. They've introduced themselves to the audience, and then they've read from their piece. So if you are ready, we'll have you do that. So for the audience, Arego Dut is the author of My Skin Is Not My Sin, which is the first poem in the collection. So Arego, you can intro yourself and then read from your piece.
Okay, so my name's Arego Dut, and I'm from Canada. I've been here for 20 years. I came here in '98 with my family, with my mother. I was a refugee, so we came here through refugee status, and I'm into my home, and I love it. So right now it's winter. It's cold. It's really cold out here, but I've just graduated from McEwen University, so I graduated with a degree in communications, and I'm a part-time freelancer and a spoken word poet back here. I don't know what else to say. If you guys have any questions, just let me know. But my poem is titled My Skin Is Not My Sin. And this is about the type of apprehension I've gotten because of my dark skin color. I am South Sudanese, so we are the darkest of the dark in different ranges. And it focuses on the various places I've traveled and how wherever I went, no matter which continent it was, there was always some weird hesitation based on the tone of my skin. So I will start. Age 11, location Canada. Cold-eyed and soulless, a little kid just like me calls me a nigger. His name still etched in my memory, undeserving of my voice, he shall remain nameless. Only 4 years in this foreign land, and my ears knew that this word was not to be heard nor received. I knew at the age of 11, once it rippled in the air and made its way into its being, it could destroy your every being. The images of roots flashed before me, and I knew what I had to do. Mama told me, this is a story you must see. This is a story you must know. This is a story of our people. This is my story. This is your story. I walked defeated, but not broken, and knocked on the solid door of my vice principal's office. The mahogany deep brown door is like my skin, but I do not possess the strength of its roots. Susan, what's wrong? Foreign land, foreign name, what has become of me? He senses my silence, the absence of me, my defeat. I say quietly, he who shall remain nameless called me the N-word. Sweet man, his eyes tell me he can't even fathom what the word means. I whisper as if I was the one who just attempted to destroy being with my words, nigger. Shocked and eyes filled with intent, he does what I could not, takes a stand. Age 11, location Canada. Slowly regaining my strength, I turn the corner, cold-eyed and soulless. A little kid just like me calls me a nigger once more. My skin is not my sin. My skin is my strength. My skin is sacred. Age 19, location Mexico. The sun picks up the myriad hues of my skin. Dark mahogany browns, the golden honey colored undertones, the black ebony shield passed down to me by my ancestors. Desperately wanting to take in and absorb every ray I can because my other home does not always afford me this privilege, I go to the pool. While my soul sister, the Eritrean goddess, smudged in the smoke of her Aboriginal ancestors, my Canadian beauty, laced with multiple Nordic and European bloodlines, remain in the hotel room. After completely soaking myself, allowing myself to be consumed by Mother Nature's wetness, the blue ocean water brings me back to life because I knew at the age of 19, water is life. I wait patiently in the line to return my towel. A young girl just like me stares at me. Her eyes not cold or soulless, but empty. She comes towards me. I stay still, trying to speak to her but unable to. We are both the various colors of roasted almonds, children of the same blood trail, but we do not understand one another. Wanting to help her, I motion to the towel line because the heart of my ancestors always offers a helping hand. She begins to touch me without my consent, rubbing me as if I'm nothing but an attraction, an animal. She calls her boyfriend to come touch my skin. Shocked and bewildered, he knew that for some people, I am nothing more than my skin. My skin is not my sin. My skin is my sultriness. My skin is sacred. Age 22, location, United States of America. Rocking and strutting in my white two-piece bikini, I am whole as I walk down the poolside. The Vegas heat is dangerous. It can make you easily sin. I walk past a black male, his hues filtered down through generations. He looks at me in awe as I pass. I hear him say, "She is gorgeous." Salted and seated in the shady underpinnings of an umbrella, two women, black women, their hues filtered through generations, look at me with disgust and say, "She is so dark." I knew at the age of 22 that these words were not their own. My skin is not my sin. My skin is my sweetness. My skin is sacred. Age 24, location Egypt. Temporarily on the cognitive tip of the motherland, falsely believing I was back home, foolishly thinking I would be as safe as I was in the arms of my mother, my cousins, two South Sudanese goddesses who exemplify the richness of pure, unfiltered beauty, and I walk into the bustle streets of an African market. A woman drenched in the darkness, clothed in black from the top of her head to the bottom of her feet, only has a slight opening for her eyes. Her bright blue eyes give the false impression of light, goodness. She throws a sharp, ragged rock at us. I'm not sure what made me stop, hesitate. Maybe it was my guardian angels, my Baba, my sister. who each grabbed my feet and held them down, who each prevented me from being struck, broken. She hits another Egyptian man, one of her own. She says, Malish, to the man, now to the three girls who she tried to strike down, our colorful clothes, bright smiles, blinding light. I knew at the age of 24 that our skin was too much for her to witness. My skin is not my sin. My skin is my sacrifice. My skin is sacred. Your skin is not your sin. Your skin is sacred. Thank you, guys.
Yay, thank you, thank you, thank you. So glad you were able to join us and share that. I saw someone post in the comments that they read your piece to their class. Yeah. So yeah, the audience is growing, it's getting bigger.
Thank you. I'm really touched by that.
So we are going to move into our Q&A. For those of you who are just joining, this is the Colorism Essays and Poems book release party. And we are joined by several of the writers that are featured in the new book. Before we get into our Q&A though, I do want to go ahead and announce.
Okay, so I'll read the first half. Growing up in low-income housing, aka the hood, everyone faced the same struggles. Black people were the majority. It was comfortable. It was home. It wasn't until I was in middle school when I left the hood that I realized I was different and that all Black people weren't built the same. I was the Black girl with the white voice. I never knew what a white voice was or why my skin made it so hard for the two to connect. It was a known fact that I took after my daddy's side, meaning that I was dark-skinned. I just never thought that taking after your daddy's side would be so difficult. I remember a girl who was also Black telling me that I looked like a monkey. At 10 years old, it didn't bother me because I didn't understand the negativity behind the words. I remember going home to tell my mom what happened, but something stopped me. I was staring at her face and was disgusted. Someone I always thought was strong and beautiful was suddenly ugly to me. At that moment, I noticed her lips were my lips, her eyes were my eyes, and I hated them. I hated her for giving me her face. I hated my dad for giving me his skin.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And that was well read. So I'm really glad we got a chance for you to read it again because people need to hear that, especially if they haven't gotten the book already and hadn't had a chance to read it themselves. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's see if we have the count in for this door prize. And I see we have a comment. So our first question would be a review of the difference of racism and colorism. So we do have who the 15th comment was, and that is Alfonso Fernandez. Congratulations, Alfonso. So you're going to get a copy of Colorism Essays and Poems, and I actually know how to contact you. So we're going to make sure we get your address, your mailing address, to make sure you get your copy of the book. So for those of you who are just joining, remember that we have another door prize that we're going to announce at the end. It's going to be a $15 Amazon gift card, and you have to post in the chat at least once in order to qualify for that. So again, congratulations, Alfonso. So Cat Girl just posted a comment. Please discuss the difference between racism and colorism. So at the beginning, I kind of gave my idea of the difference, what the difference might be between racism and colorism. Would any of you, the writers, like to chime in about how you would explain the difference between the two?
Are we all on at the same time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I can give it a shot, and then other people can chime in because I definitely want to hear everyone else's opinions. I would say like an example for me that encapsulates what colorism is would be in Hollywood, how you have a preponderance of like light-skinned women who are portraying the entire scope of the African American or like the Indian American or even Asian American experience. And they specifically get this one type of skin tone when there's such a variety of skin tones to choose from and to tell stories. And I would say that the difference between colorism and racism is that racism is like a system that's been set up, at least in the United States, that harms people and that keeps people from having the same socioeconomic status as other people. So that's my definition of how I work with racism and colorism.
All right.
Okay. I'll give it a shot. I'll say how I view the difference between the two. So for me, colorism is the internalization of racism for people of the same race. So it's still a system. It's still like putting down people, but for us, instead of white versus black, it's people within all the black communities, or it can even be brown communities, but based on the different shades of your skin color. So the lighter skinned, curlier hair are seen as better and more beautiful, and then the darker skinned ones or people are seen as less and like are seen as inferior, and therefore they're placed at the bottom of the system. So it's racism, but within our own race, because oftentimes people think that they don't understand that, well, how those systems outside the bigger span of racism actually affects us within our own race, and then how we use their definitions of beauty, their definitions of intelligence, and then we bring everybody else down within our own group. That's how I would view it. So it's internalized, it's inner race, it's racism within one group. So blacks dividing each other. If it's East Asians, they do it too, but in terms of, again, based on the hues of the skin. The darker you are, the less you are, you are lower within the scale. The lighter you are, the more European you look, the higher you are within the social ladder.
Thank you both for those definitions. If anyone else wants to add, that's we welcome that as well. And I think too, like as your comments alluded to, that people can be the same race and have very different skin tones. And so a lot of times when we're talking about racism, we say, oh, don't discriminate against me based on my color. When really, in the terms of racism, if you're experiencing racism, then your color or your facial features or your hair texture is not really the issue. It's more about like what your racial classification is. Whereas with colorism, you might not know what race a person is, right? Because I mean, races can look the same or they can look very different. So even if you don't know a person's race, colorism means that you can still treat them differently because their hair is extra kinky, right? Or because their nose is wide and flat, or because their skin is super dark, regardless of. Okay, so we have another question from Tanya. So Tanya says, it's interesting to see that young women are still struggling with the colorism issue. Do the writers think that social media has made it worse? So we know that colorism has been around for a long time. But social media is relatively new in comparison to the history and the legacies of racism and colorism. So do you all, the writers, think in your personal experiences or just in your analysis of social media, do you think that has made colorism worse?
Oh, if I can just jump in really quickly, sorry, and just add one thing. I definitely think that social media has been an important factor in colorism in today's day and age, especially with youth and millennials. Because every day, personally, from my point, I see there's such a stigma against women particularly women who are darker of skin color, unless you are like, personally, if you are a darker skin color, you are not seen as beautiful or as popular or as sociable as women who are on the lighter scale of skin. And of course, we are all individual people, but social media perpetuates the idea that if you are of lighter skin tone, that you are more fun, you are more sociable, you are a better person to be around, and that you are the ideal woman, or you are the ideal person because you are closer to the skin tone that in society is perceived as just being the best one. So I definitely think that social media has, and it's because social media is so important in like millennials' just everyday lives. Like there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's everything you can think of telling you that, oh, you are not good enough. And you can't really get away from it because it's become such something that we've depended on in society that it's hard to see yourself as being worthy or as good as anyone else when it's constantly in your face saying that you are not.
I could add to that as well. So personally, I feel that social media is not the real you, and it's just like the best version of yourself. So on social media, people are putting out the best version of themselves, and it only exacerbates the fact that like this is the ideal of beauty, and this is how beautiful people look. They're light, they have light eyes, and all of that. So I definitely think that's a factor. And along with social media, I would also say that advertisements play a big role. So at least not in this country, but when I go to India, I see a lot of commercials for like skin lightening creams and stuff. And a lot of people see this on a day-to-day basis. So that definitely influences the way they think about this.
I would like to add, I do agree that social media has negative aspects, but I feel that in terms of like darker skinned models right now, social media has actually made an outlet for them to be seen, because there was like, I just even read an article, there was a South Sudanese girl from Howard University who her picture went viral on Instagram, and now she has a modeling contract. I know Ducky, she's another South Sudanese model who's like blowing up big time because through her sister who is doing YouTube videos, and then they showcased her on their YouTube page, and now she has her own Instagram and she's modeling for Vogue and huge places. So while social media it still definitely feeds into the like colorism and the idea that lighter is better, it's also being used by darker skin models to actually create a platform, and then from there people are actually noticing them because they're going viral, and then they're finding spaces within bigger, more like bigger magazines. So I feel like it's a platform for up and coming darker skin models who are being seen and who are just being praised. So right now I feel it's more positive in terms of just not so much the images represented, but I guess giving a platform for darker skin models or up and rising Black models who are just blowing it up.
Yeah, so I think all these comments are like really insightful and valid. And I think the idea that social media itself is kind of like a neutral force, but it depends on how you use it, right? So some people do use it to perpetuate colorism, the notion that there's just only one ideal of beauty, and that anything outside of that very narrow, tiny box of what beauty is less valuable. And then there are people who are using social media to resist all of that, right? So what I tell a lot of students, some of my students that I talk to and who are in high school and things like that, like it's important to think about how you are going to use social media. So they're all, posting on Snapchat, they're all posting on Instagram and Facebook. So I asked the question, like, do you share the memes that pit light-skinned girls versus dark-skinned girls, right? Or do you share the hyper-filtered, doctored photographs of people and say, oh, this is, what's valid? Or do you, are you more democratic about like who you interact with on social media? So I definitely think that all of your responses are true. And it's just a matter of like where we stand as people who want to, advocate against colorism, like how we're going to choose to use it. Any other comments on that? So Elizabeth has asked a question. Do you want to ask it like yourself in person to the other authors?
Yeah, sure. But just real quick, back on the other question. I just want to say that like Instagram, like for me personally, I use that as like a tool to be able to follow like a lot of dark skin models. Like I saw the girl from Howard when she started blowing up, and that was so cool. And just like a lot of inspiration for me to get that and have that like on my page to have. So that's awesome that we can use tools like that, like to set out and use them intentionally as a way to sort of put some color back into a world that doesn't typically have as much color. But yeah, I just wanted to know, like I was reading all of your guys' work, and it's so different and so amazing, and it's so great to see all these different opinions. And I just wanted to know, like, who are you guys reading, whether it's poetry or essays or even just news and media and stuff like that, that gets you inspired to write?
Do you want to maybe offer who inspires you as a launching point?
What was the last poetry book I read? Oh my goodness. I started reading, because I just got it in the mail, so I just started reading Lucille Clifton's poetry book. It's like this thick. And so I've only gotten like 20 or 30 pages in, but I'm loving her poetry. She has like very short, sparse poems because she would have to like memorize them. But she's someone who I just started reading, and I really like her, and obviously like Maya Angelou and stuff like that. I read a lot of like essays on colorism on social media, and like those are really helpful for me to help process and see what other people are saying about it. For me personally, but yeah, a lot of poetry, a lot of essays. I don't really find as much fiction, but like maybe you guys could give me some suggestions, you know, other than your work, which is amazing.
Okay, I also get inspired by Maya Angelou. She's actually one of my biggest role models besides my mother. And right now, I guess in terms of poets, I really like R.H. Sin. I got his book last summer, and they're really short excerpts because like I'm more of a spoken word poet, so that's why like my poems are really long, because I'm usually like standing up for 3 minutes and then just performing it at a cafe or something like that. But I like how short, and they're so short, but they're also so deep, and I'm very about like authenticity and showing your vulnerability, because for the longest time I grew up in a super like African household, and it was like we don't really share our feelings, and you don't really express what you're saying through your like words, you do it through your actions. So and if it was something that you're going through, you kind of just like don't really talk about it, and that I found through silence actually hurt me more. And as I grew older, I was like, okay, I'm going to start writing. So my writing became my outlet where I was really pouring out all the things that hit me, because you're not supposed to be vulnerable, you're not supposed to be sad, you're supposed to be always really strong. So that's why I love Maya Angelou too, because even though she went through a lot in her life, she was always very open about what she struggled with and how she was flawed. And those are my biggest inspirations, of people who are just completely themselves, authentically, and then show their strengths, but also show where they're weak at. So those are my two right now.
Nice. And who was the other author besides Maya Angelou that you mentioned?
R.H. Sin.
R.H.S.E.N.
Yeah, R.H.S.I.N. Sorry.
Just typing it in the comments for other people who might want to check out.
Okay, I will.
So I will chime in too, even though I'm not one of the writers. Well, I do actually have a piece in this book that I wrote 10 years ago, at least 10 years ago. But to answer Elizabeth's question, I'm actually working on my dissertation, which is on colorism, as I am naturally reading just a lot of things about that. But in general, like people who theorize about Blackness, especially Black womanhood and Black girls. So, you know, the popular names would be Bell Hooks, a lot of Audre Lorde. I'm reading some Melissa Harris Perry, Carla F.C. Holloway, and just that whole genre of people who have done a lot of critical work on what it means to be a Black woman in the world. And then in that work, a lot of them talk about colorism, right? They talk about the notion that white is right, and how therefore it sets up this dichotomy that if white is right, then the opposite of that is black, and so that must be bad. And anywhere on that spectrum where you fall in between those polar opposites, you're either going to be closer to the end that's devalued or closest to the end that's more valued in society. You're going to fall somewhere in the middle, and so you're going to find yourself in the middle at times, being treated differently depending on the context. So that's kind of where I am in terms of my reading and people that are inspiring me to continue doing this work. So we do have more questions. If there are no more responses to that one, let's see. So Ashley asks, which I think is a very good question and one that we should establish when we're talking about colorism, but what shade of brown is considered dark skin or light skin, and how is it measured? So how do we know? Like, did you grow up knowing for sure, yes, I'm definitely dark skin, or are you like some kind of somewhere in the middle? Like, how do we measure who is dark and who is light?
Well, if I can comment, if you want to go back in the day to the brown paper bag test and do it that way, then you would have to be darker than the brown paper bag, and then you're considered basically dark skin. If you're lighter than that, then you're a lighter toned person, historically.
Yes, I thank you for bringing that up. So the brown paper bag test, and then I recently went to the museum in DC, African American History Museum, the new one in DC, and they actually have a display of the brown paper bag that talks about some of that history that Ebony just brought up. What do the rest of you think about that? Like in your social circles, were there times when you were told you were dark skinned, and then other times where you told maybe you were light skinned or that you're brown skinned, so you're neither? How does that work for you?
I would say that it's kind of like based on your upbringing. I don't think there's like a definite dark skin or light skin. It's all like the perspective that you were given when you're growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely during high school, I remember there being people would always be on that debate, oh, you're team light skin, team dark skin, and that was like a huge thing that would always come up. I still personally do not get the whole argument of it, but I remember just being told like, oh, you're team this, or you're team this, and people would like stand there and just kind of categorize you, and then from that you kind of just not forced, but you were put into groups of people, and like if you were seen talking to anyone else who was like from another team, then you were like, oh, okay. They're like, you don't want to talk to people in your own group, and it's weird because like it doesn't, you're people, so you should be allowed to talk to whoever you want to, but yeah, definitely that there are instances where you just kind of categorize into groups, and it doesn't really make any sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give an African perspective because I always found it was really funny because people would say certain people were dark skinned, but then I was like, they're light though. Like, you know what I mean? If you compare them to like my skin tone, or other Africans were just like, so I always found it funny that people would consider themselves dark skinned, but within, I would view them as like being like, because they were lighter than me. So, and then I also found it really interesting that like here it's like, when it comes to like non-blacks, they just see us as black people. But I feel like the team dark skin, team light skin is more so focused. It's built within black people as a whole. Like they see the difference between light skin, dark skin, but everybody else just sees us as black people. So I find that very funny.
Yeah.
Well, not funny, but interesting. Like.
Yeah, we got you. We got your meaning. Yeah, I think I like that we have people who can speak from different cultural perspectives, like on this live stream, because it's so much better to like hear it, you know, from people who have these different experiences rather than just me telling people, well, it's culturally relevant, right? It's based on like your cultural surroundings, and even within the same nationality, for example. I've heard people say, you know, and when I'm in Louisiana, and I'm around like people who are like mulattoes or Creoles, and I'm considered dark skinned. But then I go to a different part of the country where that doesn't exist, and I'm one of the lighter people there. So I don't think there's like a definitive answer to that. I think some people are light enough to where they will always be considered light skinned, and some people are dark enough to where we will always be considered dark skinned. But the vast majority of people, there's always going to be someone lighter, and there's always going to be someone darker. And then actually, I was watching a segment that Oprah did on colorism, and her question was, is it that you're light or dark, or is it that you're lighter than? Right. So sometimes if you're in a group of people, if you're not light by any like external standards, but in that room, if you're the lightest person, or in that room you're the darkest person, you might find yourself experiencing some version of colorism. Yes. So I see people commenting like, yes, dark skin models are coming up. Cat Girl has another question. Let's see. Says, please discuss the effects that these Black social organizations, such as Lynx and Jack and Jill, are perpetuating colorism. So are you guys familiar with how, at least in the African American historical context, there have been like organizations, social organizations, Cat Girl mentions Lynx and Jack and Jill, some HBCU, historically Black colleges and universities, some fraternities. There have been testimonials, I guess, about people who have experienced colorism in those settings. How do you all think that that kind of practice within the community affects or perpetuates colorism?
I'm like reading up on the side because I'm not familiar with either of those, but
yeah, I'm not familiar with them either, so I don't feel like I can speak to it. Yeah.
I think I've only heard them in passing, so I'm not familiar enough to speak on it also.
Okay.
Yeah, same. Because initially when you said Jack and Jill, I was thinking of like those old school like primers that you learn how to read on, like Jack and Jill went up the hill, and I was like, well, yeah, they were always white, but no, that's not what you're talking about at all. So I can't comment on that.
I think to speak to what Cat Girl was asking about, so a lot of these organizations came up in a time like way before my time, way before any of us who are on this, panel right now were active or even alive, really. But there was a practice of exclusion, right? So among some African Americans in the early 1900s, mid 1900s, there was this like kind of classism, this social class distinction amongst Black people. From most accounts I hear, it's mostly class-based, but it also happens to map on the skin tone. So it happens to be class-based, but it also happens that most of the upper middle class Black people were also lighter skinned in many instances. And so that's where the brown paper bag test that Ebony mentioned comes from. So in order to enter these social organizations or these social events, dances or parties, people would exclude you based on whether or not you were too dark to associate in their social circles. So that's a very general summary of what I think the question was getting at. And I think it's more taboo now to outright practice that, but you still see like the past few years, I've still seen like people posting parties for like at different like nightclubs or something like that, and they'll have like light skin versus dark skin as the theme for that party, even in like 2016, 2015, whenever those things showed up. But yeah, I think it's definitely more taboo now. People, even if people still try to be exclusive, I don't think anybody will get away with in 2017 actually enacting a paper bag test or actually being as explicit or overt as they might have been in the past. Yeah. Do you all know or see other examples of exclusion like that, though? So even if you're not familiar with those particular organizations, have you seen social clubs or social events, maybe parties or things like that, where people say that it's for an exclusive group of people based on skin color? Has that been something y'all have seen?
I've just read articles, and I also know that in Brazil there's a lot of racism in Brazil, and I know that for like job applications they ask for photographs when you're applying. So that's like, and in Brazil there's like a huge favoritism towards lighter skinned people, where they even have like, I was reading this one article and it was like they even have this like picture that it's like the dream of a black grandmother where it's like they filter, they wish that their children marry white men so that they can filter out the blackness, and then in the portrait it's like she's so happy that her granddaughter is like white now, because they have like, they'll show the progression of the mother to the granddaughter, and then by then the young daughter is like a lot lighter. So that's like the dream of a black woman there, and it's very, very rooted in like colorism and that idea. And the idea of like sending a photograph in order to apply for a job, that's horrible. Like, so that's the things that I've like seen, not witnessed personally, but just through reading and stuff. And I find it horrible.
Yeah, I've heard there's someone who is about my age, so in their early 30s, and they said that when they applied to a school in the South that I won't name, they had to submit a photograph along with their college application. And that school is among some of the ones that have been accused of excluding people based on their skin tone in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think if it's a private school, then maybe you have that lingering on, but definitely any public institution, that's not gonna fly. And it really shouldn't fly at the private ones either, but and I think your comment about Brazil, a lot of Latin American, South American cultures, they call it mejorando,
Yeah.
mejorando la raza, or improving the race, or whitening the race. Yeah, and it's this idea that you can marry people who are lighter or whiter, and therefore, as generations pass, your family will become white, and therefore better, or be able to have social mobility, upward social mobility based on that. Okay, yes, and so Adoka writes, who is also featured in the book, who was the author of Black Tea, just left a comment that this topic isn't only an African American issue, it's all brown people, whether Indian, Hispanic, Asian, etc. And yes, that is absolutely true. I think it's really important for me that we talk about, colorism in the global context. Obviously, there are similarities across cultures, but there are also differences, right? So some people might have questions or like have a particular experiences that are unique to their nationality group or their ethnic group. But then we'll find a lot of commonalities across all the stories, which is one of the joys I've had of hosting the contest over the years, is that the people who submit are so diverse in terms of age, the languages they speak, their national origins and things like that. And so I've been blessed to read their stories and to see that colorism really is a global phenomenon. And across all these cultures, for some reason, there is a privileging of the more Eurocentric look, the lighter skin, the straighter hair, the lighter colored eyes, the smaller noses. And that says a lot to me, the fact that on all these different continents, darker skinned people feel the need to either bleach their skin or to wear eye contacts or straighten their hair, to push towards this Eurocentric, this white ideal of what it means to be beautiful. And obviously it's more than just like standards of beauty too, right? Because then there are associations of intelligence and, who's safer to be around in terms of like crime or violence. So all those things in different cultures definitely affect people in similar ways. There's a question about how men are involved in colorism, and particularly in the healing process. So one thing you might notice is that the people who are presenting here, it's largely a feminine discussion, right? So there aren't. I would love to have more male participation in the writing contest. So putting that plug in for 2018, guys, if y'all are out there and you're listening, we want to hear your stories too, whatever your perspective is on colorism. But to the featured writers who are on the call, in your opinion, what is the role of men in terms of like stopping to perpetuate colorism and helping communities to heal?
I would say like on a personal level, like for me, my father has been very instrumental in like creating my identity and like image, and like telling me like almost on a daily basis that I'm beautiful and not just beautiful for a Black girl. And I would say that like the role of men in like the role of Black men in like, or just the role of men of color in the healing process would be to unpack the baggage and to start unlearning like the concepts of beauty and stuff like that. So they're not projecting that in their daily lives, and hopefully never onto their own children that they would have.
Yes.
From my perspective right now, with my daughter, as I tell people that I have a small child, she's about the same color as me, and she's 3. So she's just now discovering what's beautiful, what's, what she thinks is beautiful. And right now she has hair big, she's brown skinned, and she doesn't think she's pretty. She tells me I'm not pretty. Hard for me, but I always tell my husband, just make sure you tell her that she's beautiful too, just so it's a double team effect. Because at the end of the day, it's where a lot of women, they don't want to admit it, but they do a man's perspective and actually hold on to it. Because before my husband, I was in a relationship with a guy who I thought liked me, but he always wanted to change me. He wanted my hair to be longer or straighter. He wanted me to be a little bit lighter. He wanted me to look like a video girl. When I was younger, that's what the look was, to be a video girl. It wasn't Instagram or anything like that. When I was in high school, we had music videos, and it was mostly with the long hair and things like that. So for me, it's more important for my husband to make sure that my daughter feels that she's beautiful. Me, it's a little bit too late for me. I'm fine. I'm comfortable with my skin, but I want her to grow up, to go through what we've gone through, as far as beautiful as we should. Not feeling it until later on in life, where it cuts so deep. You have to write about it, and you have to get the. Hopefully, men are listening to this and see in this role, every woman feel beautiful, no matter what color they are. If they're dark, light, make sure you tell them that they're beautiful.
Yeah, so we see, like based on your comments, so like the role of fathers, our father figures, right? So it might not even be a biological father. In this, in some instances it might be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. But the father figure, I think, is a great starting point in terms of the healing process. Thinking about like men in terms of colorism healing, I know a lot of times we focus on women, but have you all seen or like witnessed the fact that men too kind of internalize like these notions of beauty for themselves? So like it might a young man, try to bleach his skin, or like feel like he has to get waves in his hair so he looks like he has good hair, or be ashamed of like the fact that his lips or his nose are really big. Because I know even for me, like as recently as like a couple of years ago, I've heard people like crack jokes about guys who are very dark skinned. If you turn off the lights, so and so is going to disappear or whatever. So even for themselves, how might men, look to healing?
I've seen men who bleach their skin, and it saddens me. It saddens me when anybody bleaches their skin. And just as it's like a culturally diverse, racially diverse issue with colorism, it's also very gender based as well. It flows in both ways. And it's what I find interesting is that in terms of a lot of issues that women face with colorism is portrayed by the media and like music videos, and they always have lighter skin models. And what I find interesting is that the media actually kind of boosts dark-skinned men more so. Like we have our Idris Elbas, and we always see like, oh, the darker guys are the more, masculine, more tough, and then they do have negative stereotypes to that. But in terms of like sexualization, it's more of a positive image. And then it's weird how outwardly, like there's men that are still trying to bleach their skin and stuff. So what I would say is just, it's all about self-love and self-care. So actually opening and unraveling yourself and admitting that you do have issues with your skin, or like you do have insecurities, and that it's okay to feel these ways, but you have to like work at it. And like changing your skin and causing yourself to get sick, because these things are all chemicals we're putting in our body. It's not worth it. It's never worth it. And like our Black men are beautiful. We're all beautiful. And I think it's really important for us as a whole race to just come together and like show our love for one another. It doesn't mean that you can't be in like an interracial relationship. That's totally fine. But just when you're speaking about each other, like let's uplift each other. Because I see comments all the time where people are putting down dark-skinned women or putting down dark-skinned men, and I just don't understand it. Because you're putting down your mother, you're putting down your father, like, and if not, maybe your great grandfather if you were like interracial or whatever. But it just doesn't make sense to me. And I just think if we were just more positive with what we're saying, it'd be better.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up the Hollywood, like the movie, the TV industry, and how there's almost this fetishization of darker skinned Black men as being like hyper masculine and like being like the sex symbol, right? Because if you it's interesting. Like I would encourage all of you to do your own little kind of experiment and see, whenever you see a couple in the media, who is the darker person. If you see a heterosexual couple, so there's a man and a woman in the relationship, who is the darker person in that relationship? Mostly, most times it's going to be the man who has the darker skin in that relationship, and the woman has the lighter skin. And that's a pattern that we see in Hollywood, even though I don't know if there's evidence that that pattern actually exists in the world, right? So sometimes Hollywood mirrors the world, but then other times they are creating this like alternative reality or this like fantasy world. Other thoughts on that?
One thought that I have is how in my family, because I come from a very large family, there's 10 kids in my family, and so there's a wide variety of skin tones. And one thing that my parents and my grandparents always did was to try to make sure we were consuming media that was supportive. So like there would be like Black pictures of like very dark skin, very medium skin, very light skin, just a variety, so that everyone could see themselves represented in just the artwork that we had up on our walls, and like subscription to like Ebony and Jet. So like we would have we'd be able to see ourselves on covers and see ourselves in television when we watched. And it is very different to like go from trying to see yourself in the media to then just watching the media just by turning on the television, and you won't typically see yourself. It's like, oh, it's a very white screen that I'm looking at, versus if I'm attempting to find myself, then I can, but it may take a little bit of work. So just making sure that you're consuming media that's representative of you as a person who's intelligent and beautiful is one way that I and my family have practiced that.
Thank you for sharing that. I applaud your family, the leaders in your family, for instilling that in all of you. Because it's so easy to just let young people just watch TV. It's like, oh, go in the room and watch TV. But yeah, I think we do have to try harder, unfortunately, especially depending on if you're in countries like the US or other like formerly colonized countries, it is harder to see representations of darker people or brown people or people of color of all shades in media, especially when the people making the decisions tend to be like older white people, usually older white men. But I think, as Elizabeth's example illustrates, it's worth the effort, right? To put in the extra effort to find media that you can consume, that your family can consume, to develop that healthy esteem. I wanted to read some of the comments that people are writing, and this kind of speaks to that in terms of like colorism being a global issue. Tiana says, yes, in the Asian community, it goes deeper. They push for skin bleaching and lightening. Although it's big in Jamaica, the Asian companies tend to have a theme of colorism in their ads. And Kritika talked about that when she goes home to India. She actually sees commercials for skin lightening ads. Alfonso says, I know for a fact that in Guatemala, the indigenous people are looked down upon, even though many of them speak 8 different languages, and they're creative and they sell things to tourists and things like that. We have another question from Raylan. So Raylan asks to the panel, when dark-skinned people are being excluded from any social setting, family, etc., what are they actually trying to eliminate? What is the benefit of excluding dark-skinned people? I think this is a good question. So why? What's the point in discriminating against dark-skinned people, right? So even if you have a personal bias, like, oh, I don't think dark-skinned people are attractive, or I think dark-skinned people are, lazy or unintelligent. But like, what's the benefit of excluding dark-skinned people or discriminating against dark-skinned people? What do people gain from that?
I can speak about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so personally, I mean, there's no reason to discriminate against anybody. It's just that there's a lot of history involved in it. So like there's colonization and colonialism that plays a big part in it. Like everyone's a person, and that's what should be like the most important thing. But sadly, skin color is considered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that history of colonization and colonialism that you bring up is important to remember when it comes to colorism, because sometimes we think it's somehow separate from those things. Like it's not the same as racism, but it's part of a larger system, right? So if racism never existed, then people wouldn't have internalized it. And colorism is internalized racism, right? So if colonialism had never spread this idea that white is superior, then you wouldn't have people like so desperately trying to bleach their skin, right? So there are these like larger systems that colorism is a part of. And so I'm glad that you talk about how it's part of that as well.
I would like to say something.
Uh-huh.
I don't think there's a benefit, like if we're talking modern day right now, there's absolutely no benefit. But historically, when colorism, when you didn't have darker skinned people around you, it was a protection. It was protective. It was to protect yourself. So like if you were lighter skinned and you could pass as white, you didn't want people to know that you possibly could be black, right? Just because you would be at the bottom of the social ladder. You couldn't get jobs. You probably may not be able to feed your children. So there was like a protectiveness in terms of like trying to protect your family, trying to like climb up as much as you can. But in this day and age, there's absolutely no benefit at all. Maybe besides your own perception of like, oh, I'm better. Like just if you're still stuck within that mental slavery of like white is better, lighter skin is better. So it's more of a self-esteem boost for themselves, even though it's for a temporary night where you're not around those people. But like it just means that you're not okay inside. And I don't see any benefit at all.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's people that are still stuck in backward beliefs and mental slavery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, like, if I can summarize what I hear you saying is that it's kind of a way for people to establish status.
Yeah, like a false sense of status. Because I don't think nowadays there's no benefit. Like in the past it did. It could actually result in real, but I think today there's really no benefit in terms of it. More so for perception, a superficial sense of I'm better.
Yeah. Yeah. And they say that if you have to tear other people down to make yourself feel good, then you're going about the whole self-esteem thing all wrong. Right? We should be able to lift each other up simultaneously and get some sense of like self-worth from that, right? So like you shine, I shine, we all shine, and then the world is, shining bright together. Other comments on that? Let's see. I think we have a few more questions. So one, Cheyenne, I think says, do you feel that lighter skinned African Americans are treated better than darker skinned African Americans? And again, I think we can, so some of that has already come out just in the discussion, like in the readings that you all have. But I think we could also just talk about lighter skinned people globally across the world. So not even just African Americans, but do you think that lighter skinned people in general, in any context, are treated better than darker skinned people? And I think because we kind of already have touched on that, I'm wondering if you all have more specific examples that we can use to illustrate what that might be like. And I'm also interested to see if you actually disagree, if you think that maybe that's not the case. Anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, I think that it's a hard question to tackle. I think I'm gonna put that out there first. Mm-hmm. I personally do not believe. I think that my personal belief is that we are all human. We are all on the same inside. We all have the same blood running through us. So there is no race that is better than another. There is no one shade of black that is better than another shade of black. We're all the same inside. We're all trying to find happiness and live a good life. So I do not think that I just don't believe that there is one that is better than another. I think that for those that do think that there is something that, and this is just my opinion personally, I'm not trying to focus on anybody. I think there is something that, unfortunately, that they are missing out on personally, and that there is, unfortunately, stigma that they have probably run into in their lives that have made them feel that they are not good enough, or that people around them of a different skin tone are not good enough. And that is quite unfortunate. But I mean, I just like reiterate that we are all really the same on the inside, and that there is no one that is better than the other.
Yes. If we could just project that thought like throughout all societies, that would be great.
I guess I'm Canadian, so if you guys want to consider my experiences here as African, whatever. Based, like, my personal experience, like, when I went to the States, there was I remember I went to a club one night. I don't even remember what the club was called, but there was this one black guy. I don't know if he's never seen anybody as black as me, because when I went to the States, like, I went to the it was Los Angeles. It was like this one area that it was like the Spanish area, and I walked in to get like just a convenience store, and the lady there was like she was speaking Spanish, so there was a customer that could speak English, and she was like, he became our middleman, and she was so happy to see me, and she was like, you remind me of my doll. Like, when I was a child, I had a black little doll, and you remind me of her, and you're so pretty, and it brought a lot of happiness to her, because like, and when I was in Mexico, there was a lot of love for darker skin. Like, they loved me. They wanted to take photos. They wanted to just like talk to me, because like they're really proud of their African roots down the line. But when I went to the States, I felt that everybody was like, oh, they could tell that I was African. They knew that I wasn't like that I wasn't born in like 5, 6 generations, 8 generations in. And I had there was like a weird encounter one night at the bar, and there was this one guy who he was with his friends, and I was with my girlfriends, and his white friend liked my girlfriend, and they were like talking and stuff, and I wasn't even interested in him, and I was like, just dancing and having fun. But the whole night he was just giving me these like this dagger look, like just was so rude. And then I was like just trying. I'm like, oh hi, like I'm Susan, and he's like, no, didn't even want to look at me, didn't even want to talk to me. And I don't know what it was, and that I had to be because I was dark skinned. Like I just don't know what else it could be, because there was no other reason for him to act the way he did, and he didn't want to like hang out or be seen or be around me. And I was just like, it was the weirdest interaction I've ever had. And so like overall, I feel like there is definitely like social treatment of treating people that might, like when I was in the States, I felt it a little bit, but there was also, it varies. So there is people out there that will treat darker skinned girls a little bit less than the girls who are lighter or prettier and stuff, or who they feel are prettier because of their skin tones and whatnot. So it's still very present, I believe. I still believe there is treatment based on colorism.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm sorry that someone was such a jerk to you. And for anybody who has had that kind of experience, I've had experiences myself where it's kind of like how when we talk about racism, white people are like, well, maybe you're just making that up. Like, are you sure you aren't just being too sensitive? So the same thing kind of applies when I'm like reflecting on experiences I've had with colorism, right? It's kind of like what you were saying in your reflection, like, it had to be because I was dark skinned, right? And sometimes it's like, it's obvious my sister is several shades lighter than me. So I'll notice, I'll say, well, you didn't treat her like that. Like we're sisters and we are here in the same space, you know, but it's very obvious that you're treating me differently than you're treating her, right? So sometimes that it's that juxtaposition, like that contrast even of like, if he was just treating everyone like that, then yeah, he is just, you know, a terrible person and he doesn't like people in general. But a lot of times you'll notice it because you're singled out in some way. I'm gonna read some of the comments and then like maybe others want to chime in. So Idoka says, I do believe that lighter skin tone people are treated better. I am a very light skinned African American woman, and I've seen darker friends tease more growing up. It starts in the home. And then she goes on to say, another huge issue I've experienced comes from the white community who make comments about my people in front of me because I don't look Black. It happened as recent as 2 weeks ago. That must be tough to deal with in terms of like how you respond. So Doug, if you want to leave some comments, I haven't gone through all of them, but and kind of talk about like what that experience is like. But then she says you work on your soul to appreciate yourself and others. So Ashley says, I don't think I've received better treatment because I have a lighter skin tone. I think when a white person sees me, they see another Black woman. Yeah, so we have two like different opinions on that. So like some light-skinned people might have noticed, like Idoka, that they're being treated differently than their darker skinned friends, and then other people who are lighter skinned say that white people treat them the same. But that's like beyond white people, maybe other African Americans or other people of your own race have treated you differently, even if white people only see you as a Black person.
I want to make a note too, because I remember when Tyra Banks, the show used to happen and whatnot, colorism is not only like the darker skinned girls are being treated worse. There was like a lot of stories of lighter skin, like Mariah Carey's talking about how she used to get teased because she was so white. And they used to like make fun of her hair, like didn't think she was Black enough, and so or treated her worse because she was lighter skinned. So it can go both ways. Or some people who are darker skinned, they might treat lighter skinned people less, like with less respect because of the internalization we have because of the viewpoint from like based on colonialism and like white supremacy and Eurocentric views and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wrote a blog post a few years ago about how colorism affects light-skinned girls and women. I actually got some criticism for focusing on light-skinned people in terms of colorism, because a lot of people are like, well, no, because it's really an issue that like dark-skinned people really struggle from. And again, we talk about like across the world, it seems to be that lighter skin is valued more than darker skin. There are research studies to show like social inequalities and disparities among people of the same race based on skin tone. So we have to acknowledge that in various societies, there is like a systemic influence that colorism has, where darker skinned people are devalued, and it impacts their actual day-to-day life. Some of the research would be that is most disturbing to me was it was either 2013 or 2015, a study that said that African American girls with very dark skin were 3 times more likely to be suspended from school than African American girls with very light skin. There are similar studies that talk about how lighter skinned African Americans of any gender, male or female, are likely to make as much as 10 or 12% more in their income earnings than dark-skinned African Americans. And they're like on the Colorism Healing website, I've been collecting like research that goes all the way back to 1917, so like 100 years at this point. And all of the research talks about how like systemically there is like status difference in terms of like socioeconomic outcomes, in the justice system. One study showed that light-skinned African American women receive shorter prison sentences and spend less time in jail than dark-skinned women who commit similar crimes. And then there are like gender nuances, right? So like something that impacts women one way might not necessarily impact men the same way. And a lot of the research that talks about light-skinned African Americans or light-skinned people, it does talk about alienation. So what Arego is talking about, how you could be pushed out or ostracized from your own community because you're light-skinned or you're not seen as Black enough. And then one study talks about this thing called survivor's guilt. So if a light-skinned African American does perceive that they're getting some benefit or some advantage, they don't want it, right? Like, I don't want to be singled out from other African Americans because I'm lighter. I don't want white people to think I'm more intelligent or to think I'm more trustworthy, and so they can hire me on their job instead of a darker skinned African American. So there's this psychological pain that comes with that. Even if you are receiving, quote unquote, social benefits, there's still this like emotional and psychological pain that's a downside to even that. I forgot where that started from, but I'm looking at some more of the comments, and then obviously you guys can chime in too if you want. But Alfonso was saying that they do the same to him, is what Adoka was talking about, how white people will talk to him as a light-skinned Latino male. So they'll say like stuff, and then they'll see his face change, and he's like, it sickens him to see that intolerance. And Adoka says it hurts and it's nasty. Yes, to have to be privy to like all these like racist things that white people say to you or around you just because they assume you're somehow different than the people they're talking about. Let's see. There's some really good conversations going on in these YouTube chats, so good job. We're gonna have to pick a higher number this time to judge who's going to win the next door prize. But I want to ask Cheyenne's question, because I think in the work that I like to focus on, this is always like what I like to come to. But Cheyenne asks, how can we learn to love and appreciate our own skin, hair, and features while also loving or appreciating others? And I think Janelle was talking about this and how like she sees that no one is better or worse, but that we are equally beautiful. But if maybe we could all chime in on that, like how we can appreciate ourselves without having to deny the beauty of someone else, right? Like, so I can say I'm beautiful, and even if you look different than I do, you are too still beautiful, right? So how do we get to that point?
I think it works. It starts off by just loving yourself fully. Because if you already love yourself and you're able to look at your attributes that you do have and be like, you know what, I'm really great at this, or I'm good at that. there's no reason to want to put other people down to make yourself feel better. If you can actually look at yourself fully and know what your flaws are and accept them as like you being human, and then knowing what you're really good at, and then just loving yourself fully. Because I think oftentimes when we do the whole comparison, like I hate comparisons, I really do. And it's most always built on a need to make yourself feel better. So don't look outwardly to make yourself feel better. Look inwardly and be constructive to yourself and see what you're really good at. And then always aim to be the best in whatever that is that you like. And then from there, you'll feel more confident within yourself. Your self-esteem will grow. And then there'll be never any reason to compare yourself to other people, because you're already happy with who you are inside and you're already happy with what you're producing. And oftentimes people who want to put other people down or compare or whatever, it's because they're lacking their own self-confidence. So I think it's literally just working on yourself, working on your inner, and just to stop comparing. That's the worst thing you can do to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yes, comparison is the enemy of happiness, as someone once said.
Yeah, I think if you're definitely agree with everything that you just said, and like if you're comparing yourself to someone else and trying to become in their image, you're only ever going to be a second best version of that when you could be your own best version of yourself. So I definitely agree with everything that you just said, and like that's kind of how my outlook on it is as well.
I also think that it's like it's definitely a group effort. I think that I know a lot of times we try to better ourselves and then look onto others, but I know that like sometimes it can be hard to like start by bettering ourselves. So I think what you can do is try to like find a group of people or find someone like you who's been through the same things. Like, oh, I've lived life where I have been told that I am not good enough because of the color of my skin, or I'm not good enough because I belong to this race. It doesn't have to be black. It can be literally any other minority. And find someone who's like you and who's gone through similar experiences and kind of just build off of each other. Be like, you are beautiful. I'm beautiful. We can go through this world knowing that as long as we have faith in ourselves and that we know that there are other people like us who have been through the same things, just build off each other and like find more people who need that support. Because I definitely think like raising yourself by yourself can be quite the task. It can be like the ultimate task, to be honest. And to support other people, if you can't really support yourself, is a hard task. So build off of other people, find people who are like you, make a community, and just live in a way that betters other people, betters yourself, and kind of just makes everyone happy. Because going through things like this alone, both from personal experience and just knowing other people have, it's lonely and it's sad, and no one really wants to live like that. So like find people, like make time to help those and help yourself.
I love that. So I quoted you, I said it's definitely a group effort. I mean, I gave you credit for that, for saying that. I think that's so important. And then like you're saying, like if you feel like you need support, to go and seek it out. But also like if you meet someone or you know someone in your life and you can tell like, okay, they might be struggling with this thing. Like, let me reach out to them. Like, you know, so I think those of us who have gone through some healing, who have come out on the other side, you know, healthy, and or who have maybe from the very beginning have been taught to practice self-love and to love others for who they are. Maybe when we see like either students or like family members or co-workers or friends, like kind of be compassionate and empathetic and like look for those opportunities to extend that community to people who may not have it within them yet to seek it out on their own. So I love that you said that.
I agree. I think it's good to have good people around you as well, because sometimes like your family's just not enough. Because when I was growing up, my mother always told me that I was beautiful, and like we had a really strong like family unit. So a lot of my insecurities came from external. So even when one of my poems that I have is called Darkness, and it's just like learning to love my dark skin and like learning what all the things I have, not just in terms of like my physical beauty, but like that I'm intelligent and creative and I have so much to offer. But it was always external, like always men. But like what men said around me that created my insecurities growing up. Not so much the females. It was always just, yeah. So I think it's so important to have people around you that are outside your family a bit, because teenagers and young people, we definitely put a lot of our opinions based on what our friends say or what our circle says or what other people say when you're growing up in adolescency. So I really liked what you said, Janelle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because when I talk to people about colorism, a lot of them talk about how it starts in the home, and I think we had that comment here even in the chat. And so it does start in the home, like as you were saying, as Elizabeth was saying, and as several of you have said. You've had families that like supported you and told you you were beautiful, but I think what families and parents have to be aware of too is that they are not the only influence, right? And so it's important. Yes, that is where it starts. Like as a family, you do have to instill that self-love in the children and the young people, but you also have to recognize that they're going to be dealing with lots of other external messages that a lot of times outnumber the messages that they get from the home, but also because like of who they like, how they prioritize their social circle, like the significance of it might be like, oh, well, of course you're going to say I'm beautiful. You're my mom. Like you're supposed to say that, but it means something different when someone who is not related to me, who doesn't owe me or like doesn't, have this bond with me already, says something different, right? Other thoughts. So Janelle says that as a light-skinned person, they may feel guilty about the benefits, but that means take anti-colorist actions. Cheyenne is giving an anecdote. Says a family member won Miss World. I showed a friend of mine with dark skin. When she saw her picture, she said she won because she's light, bright, and damn near white. Does my friend love herself? So what do y'all think about that? Do you think that making that observation is a sign that her friend lacks self-love?
I'd like to comment on that one because I'm from the South, so I've done my share of beauty pageants. And it's true that like almost no matter what sort of judging panel you get, just because there's so many more white women who are in the competition, that's generally the outcome. But like when women of color do win, they are typically lighter skinned and they do have like a looser curl pattern and things like that. But I think that in a sport or entertainment, art, whatever you want to call pageantry scholarship system, that a lot of women are going through this whole self-identity crisis and system where they're asking themselves, am I beautiful? How can I be my most beautiful self? And that's something that I think most people have to go through, hopefully not on their own, but that is something that they do have to go through. And hopefully they can reach out to their system of friends and their family and be able to come up with a version of beauty that they like and that they can then go out into the world and win with. But that's not always a possibility. And I think that that's something we do need to acknowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't go as fully as that she doesn't love herself, but I can say if that was her first comment coming out of that, there's something not okay there. Just because I think for me, it's like, I don't care if you're lighter skinned or whatnot. If you're Black and you're winning something that mostly is given to people that are non-Black or like that has been restricted in some cases, sometimes where we couldn't even like get in and we finally made it, I would be so happy. I'm always rooting for all our Black people. So if I was there, like, if they were having discussions and it became like a social thing, and it's like, okay, she may have won based on colorism, and like it was more deep rooted in the discussion as opposed to like the first thing she said was that would rub me the wrong way in the sense that, yeah, maybe there's things that are not fully dealt with in terms of like internal self-love, but I wouldn't say she hates herself completely. I think that's a little extreme to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think Well, one, I like what everybody's saying. This is good. I'm so happy that y'all are contributing in the way that you are. But I like what you just did was make the distinction between maybe having some unresolved issues and some insecurities with generally just hating yourself, right? So as humans, we're all going to be on various journeys in terms of like achieving higher levels of self-love. And so I don't think that people who are still struggling with that it's necessarily like it's universal, like they hate themselves. But most people, I'm going to say most, because maybe there's that one person who never had an insecurity ever. But most people are dealing with something. And Elizabeth talked about this too, like even in beauty pageants, even people who by all objective social standards would already be considered beautiful, they're still like, am I beautiful enough, right? So I think all people have insecurities. And so another thing that I think too is that another distinction maybe between like having some insecurities that you still need to work through versus hating yourself in general. Another distinction I like to make is that critiquing colorism is not always a sign that you are hating on somebody or that you are lacking self-love for yourself. Obviously, the work that I do, I'm always critiquing colorism. I'm always like observing things and saying, oh, well, that would be an instance of colorism. That's an example of colorism. And someone in an earlier comment talked about how people like try to deny the instance of colorism or whatever. So a lot of dismissive comments are like, oh, you're just hating, or you just need to love yourself. Like if you were happy with who you were, you wouldn't make this an issue or whatever. So I personally have experienced that a lot as someone who advocates against colorism. So I wouldn't say that your friend necessarily like hates herself. Maybe there's some pain there, right? And so that's why I advocate for healing, right? Because there's still some unresolved pain. And so like as Arego said, that's for that to be the first thing that comes to mind. There's still like some wounds that need healing. But yeah, definitely like people, as we critique colorism, it's not about denying the fact that this person deserved what they got, right? Because maybe they probably were like really good and really qualified. So it's not saying that because you acknowledge the existence of colorism, you're saying that no light-skinned person ever deserved to win anything or ever deserves to get a job. We're just talking about like patterns and systems in general and how someone who looks different, who might have been just as qualified, didn't get the same consideration from the judges, right? So there are different ways to frame the conversation to where it doesn't become this, oh, you never deserve this, or I hate myself because I'm bringing it up. So we have 10 minutes left, and I want to kind of start to wrap up so we don't go over time. And I want to turn to our panel first to make sure that to see like what big ideas or big takeaways you all have when it comes to colorism. And I want you to speak to more about like what compelled you to participate in the writing contest, what compelled you to write the pieces you wrote, in terms of how like the work that does in the world. So like what role does you using your voice, what role does you using your platform in the way that you have used it play in bringing healing to yourselves or your communities? And then just any like general comments that you might have been holding back on as we've gone through the discussion.
I've talked a lot. I'm gonna let somebody else go first.
Well, through my writing, I'm gonna start with just what first got me into writing for this. I was actually going through different scholarship opportunities, and I saw this, and I mistook it for a scholarship opportunity, and then I read what it was, and I was like, oh, I should just try my hand at this, because many people in my family had write poetry. And I was like, okay, maybe I can try my hand at this. It'd be my first time. And I'm glad that it went so well, because I got to meet all of you. Thank you very much, because are all amazing writers. But it's turned into so much more than that. It's turned into so much more than just an outlet for me to practice my poetry and my writing. It's turned into something that I want to share. I want to be able to explore and educate people about colorism, and I want to shine a light on all the mistakes and the stereotypes and the prejudice that goes along with being someone who is Black, and also the issues that goes along with being someone who's in the minority group. And it's very simple, but I just want there to be education on there. I want it to be known. I want people to not be in the dark anymore on what colorism is. I want there to be an open discussion, which is something that there isn't a lot of these days, that it's something that people are afraid to talk about, and I want that to be gone. I want us to be able to be open with each other and not feel that we are being weak or that we're being dumb for wanting to speak on something that hurts us, because being able to expose yourself to other people is the strongest form of you that you can be, because you're willing to accept the negativity and build upon that. So I want there to be an open discussion about things that make us hurt and that make us cry and make us not be able to trust anyone. So if by the end of that, if through writing about colorism, if talking about colorism, about any other ism that affects us, gets us to that goal, then I think I've done the job well done.
Yeah.
So.
I love those comments. There's a beetle flying around my head. While I'm doing this, just ignore me. Continue.
Okay, I guess I can speak next. For me, my road to poetry came completely like out of nowhere. Like here in Edmonton, we have a Edmonton. It's pretty small compared to like big American cities. But I think we have about 1.2 million people in this city. Maybe we just reached 1 million a few years ago. And we have a really good tight-knit arts community. And I used to go every Tuesday religiously to listen to people just do spoken word. And then one of the poets was like, I want you to come to an event. I said, okay, I'll come watch. He's like, oh, no, I want you to share your poetry. I was like, I don't write. I don't do anything. And so my first poem was it was called Home. And it was like my search for a place where I feel like I belong, because just like that summer before I went to Egypt, and it was the first time I went back to Africa. And I'm from South Sudan, but I felt that I was like getting closer to my homeland, and I was really excited, but there was a lot of like animosity towards me, and because they considered me Canadian or like the white girl, and there was this weird interaction and all the racism that was there from the Arabs, and I felt like it's okay. I went back home, but I wasn't accepted there. And then here in Canada, sometimes people are like, where are you really from? And so I just was struggling with where I wanted to belong. So I went and did my poem for the very first time, and like in a group of like about 100 people. And when I walked away, I thought I was going to connect with only like Africans, but because my poem was about belonging, I connected with like everybody in that room, and people were coming to me afterwards, like people who were non-binary, people that were from South America, men, women, female, and then it hit me really hard. And one of my things that's really important to me is like human connection and my relationships. And I walked away thinking, I like how I made other people feel. It wasn't so much the praise, it was just like that people were able to, within themselves, walk away and felt better. And so that's why I like continue to do my poetry, because not only as a means to like actually let myself speak and deal with all the things that I struggle with, because like I told you guys before, like even though I talk a lot, when it came to like really personal stuff, I would never really share unless it's like you're a super close friend of mine. And so I use my poetry as an outlet to like get things out of me, and it helped me heal, but it also like helped me connect with other people. And the fact that, so I was like, okay, I'll just give it a shot, and it's because usually like this poem I kind of like just read it out loud, and it's more, I thought it might be too long to submit to her contest. I was like, oh, it's not like a short poem, it's not real poetry, it's more spoken word, and it's more focused on how it's read as opposed to like how it's spoken as opposed to how it's read. So I was really fearful, but I did it anyways, and then I got editor's pick, and I was really, really happy about that. So just the fact that now people are reading my poetry and in classrooms, and there was a person who commented on the Instagram, and it's just like my connections to all these people around the world who are possibly seeing my poem just makes my heart light up. And I think, so for me, it's a matter of healing myself in terms of me dealing with my own internal struggles that I'm facing with, but also how I'm connecting with other people. That's what pushes me to continue writing poetry. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
I love that. Other final thoughts from Ebony, Elizabeth, or Kritika?
I can add on too. So I really like poetry because like I started off by just writing rants when I was in middle school, but then I realized that like there's a structured way of doing it, and that's how I got into poetry because it really let me be creative. Well, over the summer, I was looking for poetry contests because I wanted to get more involved, and I found the colorism contest, and I honestly thought that it was just a cultural thing and that this wasn't an actual like idea, and it was really surprising for me, and I was like, wow, so many people actually feel the same way that I do. So I figured that I'd participate because I wanted to show people that like you're not alone, everyone's going through this. And yeah, I'm glad it worked out because I got to meet a lot of really supportive people today, and I got to reach out to people too.
Yay. I'm glad you found the contest so we can meet you. And I agree that is one of my goals for doing the contest is exactly what you said, so that people can know that they're not alone. So I'm glad you said that because that was my goal too. Other comments? And then I'm gonna give some closing announcements. Go ahead.
I can tell you guys how I got into poetry. I started writing probably in high school, but when I went to college, I actually had this program that I started up to actually have like a poetry slam and things like that. And I had someone, but I was so nervous that I didn't want to, present my poem. And it happened when, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, well, a few like years ago, maybe 10 years ago or so, he was shot in New York City 50 times by police officers a day before his wedding. So I wrote a poem about him, and it was called America 5-0. And I wanted someone else to present it for me, and he said he would, and he went up and he introduced me. So I had to go up there.
That's awesome.
And I presented it, and I realized that a lot of people were, in tune to what I was saying, and they actually liked my poem and things like that. Because in high school, I did have a teacher who didn't like what I had to say because I was more vocal as far as race and ethnicity and things like that. And I used to get kicked out of class or called a racist or things like that. And as I stated before, I live in Connecticut, so it's a lot of white people, so they're not really comfortable with things like that. Instead of listening, they rather shut it out or move it away. So as I got older and realized there are people out here like me who want to hear what I have to say, I got more comfortable with writing it down. And I'm grateful to find this contest because it was something that I didn't know anything about until recent. And I said, let me submit my essay, and luckily it got picked. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity.
Yes. All right. Elizabeth, did you want to say anything before we close out?
I just want to say that I found the contest when I was in my second year of college, and I was like, yes, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm learning about. I have to write and do something for this. And it's just been so wonderful, like hearts, so much love to be on this panel with all you wonderful people. I'm going to be like, friending you on Facebook in like 2 seconds when we're done.
Yes to that. And this is the first time I've had contestants come on together to like meet virtually like this. So I love the community, and then the people leaving the comments. Love y'all. Oh my goodness, my heart is so full right now. I'm not gonna cry until after I turn off the live stream. But we do have a final door prize giveaway. I don't want to forget about that. I know it's past 5 o'clock now. But if my assistant, Janelle, could count we have a lot of comments. Let's say, what is the 40th comment? The 40th comment. Who left the 40th comment? And assuming it'll be different than the person who won the book. So while Janelle is counting that, I want to remind you that all of the people, all of the writers that you heard from today are in this book, Colorism Essays and Poems, as well as several other people who could not join the live broadcast as well. So you can get that on Amazon or at the Colorism Healing website, colorismhealing.org. And the 2018 contest is coming up. So if you have watched this broadcast and some memories have come up for you or some experiences have come up for you, or you know someone who would benefit from submitting to this contest and they have a story to tell, either in essay form or through poetry, then encourage them to submit. It opens January 1st, 2018, and it'll be going through April of 2018. So follow these people. And actually what we're gonna have you do is, if you want the people on the chat right now to follow you on social media, if you have access to the YouTube chat, you can type it in yourself, or you want to tell it to me and I can type it in there for them so that people can follow you on your social media accounts. You can also follow Colorism Healing on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all that stuff, or subscribe to stay in touch with these writers, with the other writers who have participated in the contest. And I'm sorry that I couldn't respond to all of the like comments and questions that were coming up at the end, but this video will be available afterwards so you can share with other people and revisit it and things like that. Where can I get the book? So again, Amazon or colorismhealing.org, and the title is Colorism Essays and Poems. You can keep track with all of us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So let's see